Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our workshop today on PISAX. I'd like to introduce you to Nicolas and Alexandra, who are going to be running the workshop today. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to them. If you have any questions, we are doing this meeting in meeting mode, so you can actually put your video on and your audio if you'd like to ask a question directly to them yourselves, or feel free to use the chat. I'm happy to read out the questions for you whenever either they come in or at the end. So without further ado, Nicolas, Alexandra, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Bijal. So let's start. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the PISAX workshop. I am happy to have you all around the table for this session about information sharing and threat intelligence. Regarding the structure of the workshop, I will first do a quick introduction to the main concepts behind PISAX. What is information sharing? Why is it important? What type of information can be shared? What is threat intelligence? What is open source intelligence? Then I will give the stage to my colleague Alexandre Dulaunoy from the Computer Incident Response Center in Luxembourg, in short, CIRCL. CIRCL has the lead on the development of MISP software, which is the basis of PISAX. He will give you an overview of what can be done with this platform. And I think it's the good time to start our first poll regarding, are you currently using the PISAX platform? So waiting for the response. Okay. So we have a majority of people using PISAX. That's good. So getting probably the information generated by the platform, that's good. And yeah, some that plans to do it. If you plan to use the platform, remember that being a member of the LU-CIX and the Internet Exchange Point community, you can create or request the creation of an account on misp.pisax.org. There is an icon, no account yet register here. Within the wizard, please reference the Internet Exchange Point to which you belong. If you can also give a link to the website of the IXP, it's easier for me to check and grant the access. So now we can start the presentation. The importance of information sharing. Yeah, why sharing information? First, and in the current context, it's become obvious that knowledge of all these threats that appears outside is interesting for us. Information, knowledge about threat actors, about news, etc. Because yeah, threat intel is the knowledge that allows you to better respond to the attack and to the threats. Then sharing information allows also to build a community. Here, I would say strengthen the community, because the LU-CIX community is already built, and we are all working together as Internet Exchange Points. So here it's more a matter of strengthen this existing community. Have also more capacity. We know that security guys are currently well loaded, but working together, and this is the motto of PISAX, stronger together, being together against the threats and sharing information to enhance our capacity. And then by enhancing this capacity, we can spare time and spare money. Share, yes, but share what? This was an interesting question that rose really quickly after we started the project, the PISAX project in 2019. And we didn't know really in the beginning what we wanted to share. And we began to share information that we felt would be interesting for the community. And finally, it was not bad, because it mainly sticks to the threats categories highlighted by the current situational awareness. And what are these threat categories? First, we have phishing, phishing attacks, or phishing is a mean for most of the time stealing credentials, but also implanting malware within the laptop of the user. And we know that we can see in the news these recent malware, these destructive malwares, the wipers are well deployed this time. But we see also everything that is relating to spying, remote access Trojan, keyloggers, etc. So this is interesting to have information about this threat. Now, we have also this DDoS attack we have seen in Ukraine and also outside Ukraine. Lots of DDoS attacks are currently led, and it's important also to have information about these DDoS, what kind of technology is used, what kind of amplification in use, etc. Then we have the pre-positioning, which is a military term for saying that the attacker has initial access to your network and stay undetected, and is waiting for the real attack to be triggered. Most of the time we talk about advanced persistence threats and how these malicious people get access or initial access to your network. It's not magic, it's by exploiting vulnerabilities on your assets. And that's why it was also important for us to share information about these vulnerabilities. And recent attack is the supply chain attack. We can have hardware supply chains, but also software supply chain. Regarding our community, we have been informed recently by everything that was related to the SolarWinds attack, which is a supply chain. The malicious actor tried to intrude the supplier in order to afterwards be in your network. Also, all these threats type, if we want to share everything about these threats, we have really many things to share. And we want here to target the sharing information to critical infrastructure and operator of essential services, because as an internet exchange point in the NIS1 directive, if you are under the NIS1 directive, you have to be compliant, you have to be an operator of essential services, and certainly in the second revision of the directive, you will have definitively to be compliant to this. And we want really to target all the shared information to critical infrastructure and operator of essential services. Yes, sharing these informations allows then you as IXPs to do cyber threat intelligence, also called CTI. And CTI is what cyber threat information, mainly what you can find within the platform, becomes what is when it has been collected, evaluated, analyzed, and structured. And cyber threat information is any information that helps the company to identify, assess, monitor, and the most important, respond to cyber threats. So as a summary, we can say that CTI helps an organization to gain a more complete knowledge of threats they may face in order to better respond to it. In the platform currently, from where does this threat intelligence information come from? Currently only from open source intelligence, what is also called OSINT. What exactly is OSINT? It's any information that can be accessed publicly. In the social network, you can find things in Twitter, for instance, also in LinkedIn sometimes, Google search its result, news, mailing list, etc. It's anything that does not require hacking or private credential to be read or collected. It's public information. It can sometimes include information from the dark web. This is the current situation. However, in the future, we expect also a return on experience from the community, meaning that you all have IDSs, you have all SIEMs, log centralization, and you have traces of attack or tentative of attack on your system, on your assets, and it could be interesting to drop some information within the platform, meaning that, okay, you have detected a new threat on your logs, and you think it's interesting to communicate this information to the community. Now you have probably all seen the flyers on the social network. The information shared in the platform malware targeting critical infrastructure or operator of essential services, new DDoS technologies and amplification methods, vulnerabilities, focusing Internet Exchange Point assets, and information about threat actors, threat intelligence, and situational awareness. How can you join the community? As I already said, it's easy. You connect to the misp.pisax.org and click on the link, register now. Thanks to LU-CIX, we have also the mailing list, which is maintained by them, that you can find on the following link. And within this mailing list, we can exchange information, perhaps on new threats that you want to exchange on the PISAX platform. So feel free to drop emails within this mailing list if you have any questions. Also, if you have questions, when you try to register some event in the platform. Because I want to say also that PISAX is based on volunteering, so we need the help from the community, and we need that all the community work within the platform to share this information. Now, I think it's perhaps the good time also for the second poll question. So what type of threat information provided in PISAX is, to your opinion, the most valuable? Waiting for the response. Okay, interesting, well balanced. So everything seems to be pretty interesting. Perhaps a little bit more about DDoS information, which is clearly interesting. I believe that many now Internet Exchange Point operate some kind of scrubbing centers, and this information will be really valuable. So it's interesting for us, and I would say we will definitely on LU-CIX site provide information within the DDoS area in the future. So okay, so that's over for my part, and now I will leave the stage to Alexander, which will give you an overview of what can be done in the platform. So Alexander, the stage is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be with you today, and thanks a lot to Nicolas for doing the presentation, the introductions, and give a very good overview of what can be done with PISAX and seeing the usefulness of information sharing for the Internet Exchange Point. So what I want to do today, and we have I would say spare time for doing a kind of presentation of what MISP is capable. As Nicolas mentioned, we are the core developer of the platform for the past 10 years, and we are cooperating multiple sharing communities. Obviously, one of them is PISAX, and we put a lot of effort on that one because we think that this one is critical, especially for all the infrastructure and backbone and so on that are running the internet. And I think it's important that people are actually sharing information. So what I wanted to do with you today is to really make a quick glance of what MISP is capable and how you can even use it for the Internet Exchange Point community and within the PISAX community. So there is a MISP install. So the MISP instance is basically an open source software that everyone can download, run on their own. You can run your own MISP instances. You can even connect to that instance from PISAX, or you can connect to the web interface and start to use it. So it's depending on what you want to do and how you plan to do it. But it's kind of flexibility. You can run it on premises. You can use a specific one from ISAC or from the PISAX community, for example. And you can even interconnect with other MISP instances. I know some telecom operators that are joining multiple communities, having the same MISP, but joining different ones. So if you connect for the first time to a MISP instance, you have this kind of view, which is what we call the index view. And as you can expect, it's an index of all the events that are in MISP. The first thing is, and I think this one is quite important, in MISP, everything is kind of bundled into something called events. Events are basically container of information where you can add things like specific attribute, object, and so on. It's kind of basically a bundle with the same semantic meanings. Nicolas was mentioning that you can share information about malware, threat actors, specific DDoS activities, and so on. So the event itself is basically just a container. And you can, for example, create a specific event for an incident, one for specific vulnerabilities, one for a specific report that you did. So it's really flexible. So in the case of this instance, we have already some events that are in the system. For example, LU-CIX did a lot of creation of events for different kind of things, including DDoS activities, vulnerabilities, and so on. For example, there is a strong focus, and I think this one makes a lot of sense, on equipment that are actively used by internet exchange points and ISPs. So you see that LU-CIX, for example, in this case, it was Nicolas that basically did a very simple event in this one, where we have a CV attached, the attack specific, and so on, and it is basically encapsulated into an event. And you see that this kind of event contain different things like classifications, which is basically a tag. So you have a set of taxonomies that you can select in a MISP instance. I will show you how to create even later on, but it's an easy way to basically label the information. Especially what is useful there, is not only for you as an analyst or as a user, but is useful for anyone doing API requests to get data out of the MISP instances, to inject those into routers, firewalls, equipments, or other TIP or other platforms, and so on. So if I'm going back to the index, I'll take an example that we did this morning with one of my colleagues. It's about Killnet. Maybe some of you are familiar with Killnet. It's I would say a kind of dynamic groups, mainly Russian sponsored, to basically target some countries that are in favor of the NATO and so on. And basically Killnet is using tools. And what we decided to do there is to document what the threat actor is doing and to explain the relationship between the tooling and the threat actor itself. So to summarize it, we have this kind of meta information. So again, we have this model where it's an event, who did it. You can, for example, see to who it will be shared. I will go back into details later on, but that's, I think, quite important. In MISP, you have 4 default models of sharing informations, which, for example, you can keep it for yourself. You can share it with this community, which is the case of this event. You can share it with what we call connected communities. So that means you will share it to one N+1 level and to all communities. So it will basically be distributed as far as we can on the network of MISP being connected. And then you have the 5th group, which is sharing groups. Then you can use it as a kind of granular models where you can share informations for MISP. So which is quite interesting there, because you can, for example, share informations with specific group. So for example, you can have a group for the internet exchange point, and you have a group, for example, for the rear or the specific ISPs and so on. So it's quite versatile, so you can really mix this kind of distributions. In this case, this event is this community only, so it will include all the partners that are already connected to the PISAX, and you see that you have internet exchange points in Greece, in Netherlands, in Germany, and so on, and you see that those ones will receive this event. So if we go a bit further, you see that you have a lot of I would say, kind of metadata attached to it, or context. This context would be, for example, things like tags. For example, you can add things like the classification. In this case, it's super straightforward. It's just a TLP that we attach. But for example, we can add some additional information, like Nicolas mentions, is coming from OSINT in this case. We can, for example, say that the certainty is pretty high. And we can, for example, mention that this one is coming from a specific source code repository, because you will see it. It's basically coming from different kind of repository there, coming from different organizations. So the thing is, this one is kind of what we call metadata. Is basically the container where you attach some information. In addition to that, we add already some information about the threat actors, because in this case, we know it. It's not always the same. I mean, sometimes you might share indicators, information about a specific event, but you don't have any attributions or link to a specific threat actor. In this case, we know about it, so we attach it to Killnet, and it's coming from one of our multiple repositories and libraries. where this kind of information is there and centralized. So for example, in this case, for Killnet, we see that the United States, Czech Republic, or even, for example, Romania in this case, are targeted. And the type of incident there are mainly denial of services, especially that Killnet is not really compromising and exploiting systems and so on, but they are actively doing denial of services. You see that we go for the what we call the attack patterns. So we basically have a view of the kind of techniques and impact that this kind of attacks have on the networks. For the one that are familiar, we have either a textual representations here, but we have what we call an attack matrix representation, which is basically exactly the same data there with the different techniques, but you can see it on the matrix itself. It's very useful because more you add this kind of information into your systems, you can, for example, see the different techniques used by the different attackers, and you can even see the trend. And it's useful at the end, not only for knowing about the attackers, which is already, I think, a good step, but it's helping you to at least know which kind of things that you need to be protected against. And for example, if we look about DDoS, you have some techniques. You see that sometimes they are using service exhaustion flooding. So if your services are not able to handle high load of requests, maybe you have to take measures or preventive measures in order to be protected on that one. In this case, we have additional information. This case is the Romanian target because we mentioned in this case Romania. So if we go now a bit deeper into the event itself, what do we have there? We basically collected all the information related to the adversary and especially what kind of tool they are using. And those tools are mainly available on GitHub. So it's information that you can basically collect. So when you have an incident and you need to know which kind of tool that they are using and so on, you are collecting all the references, in this case from GitHub. And then we can create what we call object. So object in a MISP event are basically collection of attributes. So the most atomic value in MISP is what we call an attribute. So for example, in this case, a username in GitHub, in this case, matrix TM is the name of the users, is an attribute. But you can have a collections of different attributes together, which have a semantic meaning. So that means really something. And in this case, what do we have here? We have a GitHub users, which is called matrix TM, having a repository, have a bio, is not a verified account, and you have a link pointing to this GitHub account. And what we did with my colleagues this morning, we were looking at the tool that they are using, which is, I think, useful for us to exactly know what kind of DDoS we are talking about. Are there partners with others for doing that? Are they reusing technologies that are done by adversaries and so on? And we see, for example, that Matrix TM organization on GitHub, which is providing the DDoS services, it's basically a team which is claiming to be from Iran. It's interesting to see that he's not really the one conducting the attacks, but he's basically the one providing the tools to conduct the attack. Then we created a specific persons, in this case, the suspect, which is a Killnet organizations. And we did the same for all the tools that we have seen. We saw another one coming from username called Bionic. Thing that is very interesting there, we can start to collect additional information about the adversaries. In this case, we are looking at followers, so on GitHub. And GitHub followers are public, so you can collect those and you can find out if a specific user are, for example, following someone else, and sometimes it's giving a lot of hints about the group and the different activities there. We did exactly the same for the tool set itself. So you have the organization on GitHub, the MHDDoS services, we were talking about the one that are following and so on. And we even created a specific object for the DDoS. We know that the government of Romania was targeted. I will show you that the representation here in MISP are in a multiple way. This one is basically column-based. So it's basically a column of all the information containing the different objects together. But what we decided to do is to make relationship. So you see that we have between each of the object a relationship. Either you can see it like that, but there's a graphical representation in MISP, which is basically giving you an overview of what are the relationship between everyone. In this case, what we are really interested in is Killnet, which is the threat actor itself. Which is basically called Killnet. It's a group, a collective of adversaries. And those one are actually using two tools mainly. One is the one that we were mentioning, but as we were able to collect a bit more information, we could build a better story, or at least a better overview of what is the attackers. And we can see, for example, that the Matrix teams is not directly linked to Killnet, but they actively provide tool set for doing their activities. Same with Bayonet and so on. Thing that is interesting too is when we started to do this exercise, we decided to basically put timestamp too. And that's the thing with MISP. When you start to add information into the systems, you are starting to get much more out of it. And for example, we have what we call the event timeline. In this case, we have a complete overview of when a tool has been released. So in this case, we know that's the first time the tool has been released. So you see that this tool has been out in I would say in the market, but at least publicly available on GitHub for the past 2 years. Nevertheless, for example, the attack on the Romanian government from Killnet is from a short period of time in April. But there are some interesting aspects, for example, the specific GitHub users that were just created at the starting of the war. So does it mean that you can deduce that those attackers are basically starting to join the project to create the tools and so on based on the timestamp? That could be. And then you see that when you start to create such kind of things, so that means creating objects, making relationship, adding timelines, and things like that, you basically start to have stories. And then it's giving you much more details on the long terms. We were discussing about other tools that we found out. We found out that basically by looking at an adversary starting to build different DDoS tools, we were able to see the evolution of techniques they were using and the different tool set there. So you see that that's technically a classical event in MISP. On this one, there's no direct relationship with others. What we can see, it's basically there's a relationship with an event in an OSINT feed with errands. Maybe it's not, I would say it's kind of a weak correlations, but you'll see that correlations later on might be useful for some other activities. This event is still not published. So you see that it's not published. Why? It's because we are working on it. And when we consider it as an acceptable level, we will publish it. And it will be shared within the networks up to the distributions scheme that we set up just before and discussed before. If you want to ask questions when I'm doing the presentations live, I don't mind, so don't hesitate to drop questions in the chat. Either myself or Nicolas will answer, and we can even discuss and even divert a bit about what we are talking about. So I wanted to show you this example because this one is a fresh example from active attack for different countries and so on. And you see that by actually doing collections, not so complex collections, is basically aggregating information from different places, you really start to have a huge knowledge of what the attacker is doing and especially what the attacker is capable of. I think for DDoS aspect is interesting. Last but not least, I did a very simple object there, a DDoS object. So in MISP, what you can do, it's very straightforward. You can basically add object, and there's an object, for example, for DDoS, where you can specify the destination, source IP, the number of packets per second, and so on. Even if you have partial information, you can basically specify it. For example, if it's kind of TCP attacks, is it just IP only, or is it, I don't know, whatever, a specific protocol and so on. You can really define that in the DDoS. For this specific case, what I decided to do is to create one for Romania with the timestamp when it was targeted and so on. And just to show you how it works, you see that I have all those objects together. And I have the DDoS against the Romanian government. What I can do is I can automatically add a reference and mentioning that this groups, which is Killnet, in this case, targets the Romanian government. So you see that as long as you have objects in MISP, you can create relationship and create your own story around it, which is, I think, quite handy because you can really design a lot of things. And we ask the question about what kind of information you're interested in. The DDoS itself is not only the activity of the DDoS, but it's all the preparations, toolings, and so on that you can express in MISP. And even if you have some idea to express other things that you collect for the DDoS, for example, we have things like PCAP object. So if you have, for example, a sample of the DDoS activities, you can push it into MISP, attach it to a specific threat actors, for example, and start to share evidences from such kind of DDoS activities. So that's a quick example of something that we just did quickly. It's not black magic. As long as you can start to know a bit of the platform is working, you see you can draw lines and relationship between objects. It's pretty straightforward. I know that Nicolas, for example, is using MISP now for the past months. He is becoming more and more familiar with the platform and start to have like crazy idea of adding new objects and new tools and so on. And that's really the thing. It's with the platform is really to bootstrap the idea of sharing. We don't want to basically lock an organization or a group into a specific way of sharing. It's really your way of sharing that need to be expressed in MISP. And that's, I think, for us, very, very important. So I will show you some other example of event that are shared in MISP, so that is giving some idea. I'll take another one. I like this one because, you know, Luxembourg is about finance very often. And we have this vulnerability about automatic teller machines. This one is an interesting one. It's basically an event containing details about the vulnerability against ATM machines. You see that we have the complete detail there about the vulnerability that is targeting NCR, self-serve ATM. Maybe some of you know about it. And you see that those ones are not encrypting, authentication, or verifying the integrity of the messages, and this could be abused, which is pretty cool for an ATM. And then you have all the description of the vulnerability. And this information is not coming from an analyst, but is really coming from an external services. And that's something else in MISP. You can basically connect MISP with additional services. In this case, it's a service that we operate, which is what we call Cfd Search. And you can automatically create out of a CV ID all those objects, and you see that those objects there are coming from these creations. And again, it's always the same model. We have the CV, in this case, for this kind of vulnerabilities, we have two CV. We see that those CV are sharing some kind of attack patterns. So you see that the relationship between different objects can be anything. In this case, for vulnerabilities, is attack patterns. So that means the technique of attack, which are shared. You can see the different references and so on, and you can even get into more information about the attack patterns. That's quite useful. In addition to that, we might have correlations. And in this case, we have correlations between the ATM vulnerabilities allow deposit forgery attacks and another one about the Sonic Wall, SRA, SMA vulnerabilities. So you see, we are talking about two different kinds of products, ATM and VPN gateways. So you don't really see the relationship, but MISP is capable already to give you some relationship. And we have another graph in MISP called the correlation graph. And in this case, it's giving you the direct relationship of attack patterns that are used between Sonic Walls and the vulnerabilities. In this case, the correlation is not, for example, on IP addresses, IS number, CIDR block. The correlation here is based on an attack pattern. So in MISP, as long as you have a field and those fields are equal or similar, and I will explain maybe different kind of similarities that you can have, you might have correlation. And that's really handy because when you start to fill data into MISP, you get more and more detail about the different systems, and you can find out, okay, maybe this IP addresses, I've seen it like in 2 or 3 different threat actors, maybe the sync call operated by an antivirus company, or maybe the threat actors are sharing infrastructure with someone else. And that's something that more you do it with MISP and more you start to add information into MISP, the correlation is really a support tool for quality management. So saying, okay, is it normal that we have so many correlations? For example, it might be a Tor exit node, an IP addresses that are used by some VPN gateways and so on, or you don't have that much correlation, so it's giving an insight about relationship between 2 specific points, specific campaigns or threat actors and so on. In addition to that, on this one, we have unstructured information. So you see this one is coming from an existing report. So in MISP, you have structured data and unstructured data. So you can do both. You can, for example, write a report and generate structured data, or you can, for example, from the structured data, generate a report. And for that, I will go back to my example of Killnet. So if I'm going back on that one, I will just delete the report I did there so that you see the example. You see that on this event that I'm working on, it's basically containing information about those threat actors and so on, some metadata and so on. But I have what we call event report, which is basically, for the one that are not familiar with Markdown, it's basically Markdown report. So it's basically text with specific markup to integrate data from MISP. And the thing that is pretty interesting, you can ask MISP to create the report for you. And I know for some of you, at least for me, sometimes it's painful to write reports from scratch and so on. Is giving you already the structure. In this case, I can even filter out the data, but I don't want even to filter. I just say, okay, just give me the metadata, the correlation, and so on, and just generate me a report. So what do I have now? I have a basically report containing already all the information from my MISP structure data into a Markdown report, which include basically everything I already added there, including, for example, objects. So you can see the objects themselves. And things like, for example, galaxies, the threat actor mentions, and so on. And this one is basically a pure text message, text report. And I can add some text there mentioning the attacks. So even if you are using MISP for structured informations, you can use it as a source to create your own reporting and so on. Because sometimes you have to report on a quarterly basis to your management or whatever. It's one way to use it. So even if the tools are really a focus on sharing structured informations, you can really use the unstructured informations as a source for MISP, or the structured information as a source for you to generate, I would say, human report. So going back to the ATM vulnerability, this one is a pretty simple example, but I can show you a much more complex one. This one is, again, a complete OSINT. I did this one because it's an old cases that maybe some of you are still familiar with. It's an investigations on threat actors called the Syrian Electronic Army. Some years ago, it was a group sponsored by the Syrian state, and this group decided to take over the New York Times by basically compromising the registrar of the domain, and this company was called Melbourne IT. So it was well documented with all the informations, including the domain takeovers and so on. And what I decided to do is to make a report, kind of post-mortem report, to describe what exactly happened there, using MISP, only using specific sources, people talking about it on Twitter, reports, and passive DNS. For some that are not familiar, passive DNS is a way to collect historical information about DNS entries. So you see that it's quite a large event. You see that I even stored all the information regarding the passive DNS aspect, domain name that has been stolen, and so on. And I did a relationship between all those events. And then what do I have? I have basically a complete story there about the specific attack. And obviously the pivot aspect is the Syrian Electronic Army, which is the threat actors. But out of that, I was able to extract various things. So for example, the detail about the victims, the kind of relationship with the specific proof and so on related to that. And at the same time, what I was able to do is I was able to verify what I have on passive DNS with some additional things, like, for example, some tweets with mention of issues from New York Times and so on, giving you timelines about this information. In addition to that, and I will even show you that, what is interesting in MISP is not to share only the result, but how you reach the result. And in this case, I share even the command tools. So it's basically the command tools I used to use the passive DNS. So like that, you don't share only the result, but how you achieve those results. And for an analyst in security is really important. And I mean, for you that are familiar with network security and network debugging and so on, very often you type a specific command on routers and so on to figure out a specific aspect and so on. You can share that in MISP. So you can really share, for example, script out of, I don't know, Cisco iOS, XR, whatever, VTI logs. You can extract it, put it into MISP, and even with the output. So when you investigate something, it's very interesting to share back the result, but how you achieve those kind of results. In this case, we have some interesting things because we have a kind of pretty long timelines. You see that it's until 2 days from 2012 because the original attacks was done in 2012, and then you can really zoom in the different passive DNS things to see when the New York Times domain was basically hijacked. And for how long, you see that, for example, this one was hijacked for 7 hours until that someone notified and found out that the registrar in Melbourne was obviously abused, compromised, so the account was basically compromised. So you see that it's a different story. Huh? So this one is a specific kind of defacement because they were seeing the registrar and modifying, but you can express it into MISP, including, for example, for taxonomies and so on. In this case, we have what we call domain abuse access method. So basically, compromise domain name registrar is exactly that. You have the threat actors and the case of effect there for the attack things, which is basically the defacement. For this specific case, it was completely public. It's TLP wide. I use it as today for the workshop to share it with you. But this one has been shared with others and it's public. So it's an example of what you can do, either a very active thing, so like the killnet things, which is like outgoing, and we see that attackers are moving tools, techniques, and so on. But even if you want to share about a post-mortem analysis, that's the way to do it too. So you can really use the system for either outgoing activities and analysis, but I would say more historical things. I have 2 other events to show to you and to really show to you that the system is super versatile and you can really use it for whatever thing you like. So if you think about sharing security or improvement within a team, within a group, or within an ISAC, you can do it in MISP. So in this case, and maybe some of you are familiar with that, it's an example with a movie called Dirty Harry, and you know that movie. It's basically the actor is Clint Eastwood, which is playing the Inspector Callan. In this case, we basically describe all the details of the inspector. We describe what kind of vehicle is running. So we have object for vehicles and so on. It's not only used for cert activities, but it's used by intelligence and so on. And then we add some one of his some relationship that he had with different partners in the movies. And again, timeline-wise, you can see that basically the same model applied to. In this case, you can see when he met someone already, when a specific vehicle appears, things like that are things that you can really describe in MISP. And again, you have an event graph, which is describing the relationship between the different elements. So for example, the vehicles, you have the details, who owns the vehicles, who knows who, and so on. That's something that you can do. Again, you can do it manually, using the user interface, or you can use the API to figure out and creating a relationship between elements and so on. And you can do it automatically with different tools. There's an extension to MISP called the MISP modules, where you have more than 250 modules there for various tools, including things that are coming from Cisco, things that are coming from OpenDNS, things from VirusTotal, Google, Mandiant, whatever, and so on. Last but not least, this one is an interesting case that we worked on, where we basically discover a threat actors, which was quite clever, but sometimes those threat actors are doing some mistakes. So it's a kind of spear phishing attack, PDF document sent to companies, well-done documents to access Office 365 documents. But the attacker did a very small mistake. In the PDF documents, he always used the same size of rectangles. So we decided to track these attackers by creating a Yara rule. So it's capabilities that you have, it's kind of an IDS rule, but for files that we push into services called VirusTotal. And automatically, we were able to extract all the attacks that he was doing on different organizations. We even found that he was targeting, for example, Airbus and other organizations. We even found out one of his servers that are not very well secure, and we were able to build around that a lot of collection mechanism. Those ones were shared with the police for a specific case there, with all the details. And for example, we had the name of the user, which is called JatBoss, which is the name of the user that we saw in the PDF documents. That's why we call that user that way. But we were able to basically figure out which organization he was targeting in the industries. We found some samples and so on. So you see that it can be really a tool that you do it for active investigations, or you can really use MISP for more post-mortem and so on. You can even mix both. I mean, and I think we see a trend over time that people are sharing information not like very late, but more and more early, because it's helping others to protect themselves, or to, for example, share additional information about DDoS activities. So the case of, with my colleagues this morning, we were looking at some tools. By digging into those, another colleague of us like, oh, but there are those tools too that are basically developed by the same group, and then you can start to work on it. So the MISP instance can even be used within a team. Doesn't mean that you need to share information. So the sharing aspect could be very localized. And if you think at some point it may be interesting for the Internet Exchange community to use it and to share it, you can decide and change the distributions mechanism in your MISP event to share back this kind of information. So that's really the quick overview of the MISP platforms. Usually, when we do MISP training, it takes like some days to do it because it's a pretty exhaustive platform, so you can do a lot of things. But today is really just to give you a hint of what you can do with MISP, how you can use it. So what we can do now, because we have still some minutes left, it's maybe discuss together about things that you want to share. We can even discuss about things that we have seen, how it works, how sharing communities are working, and we can engage in the discussions together on how you would like the platforms to evolve and how we use it in the future. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Alex. I just want to give a few words, because your presentations are always impressive, and you see the events from Alex and the events that I have encoded within the platform. And yeah, what I want to say, and to reassure a little bit potential new user of MISP platform, the main target is to share information and start small. Huh? In the beginning, you have to start small, create really basic events, and when the time is passing, then you enhance your abilities within the platform. And as Alex said, you can do pretty much everything with this platform, and it's flexible. But yeah, you have to get used to it, and you have to start small. And the first thing important is the information that you want to share in it. And if you need help, you can contact us, and we can help us. We can help you in order to record your event.
Thank you. It's a very good point indeed, because don't be afraid. I mean, you want. I show you some like complete examples, but at the beginning, if you want to share sometimes just an IP addresses, specific AS number that is causing trouble, things like that, it's fine. And that's really the thing that with MISP, sometimes you start with a very small exchange of information. It's like, let's talk about an AS number. I mean, everyone, I think, in this community are super familiar, and I think know much more than me on BGP and ISCs. But the thing is, sometimes you have, for example, ISCs that are popping up doing BGP VPNs, doing really funky stuff that are trying to peer with other partners, but they are basically kind of bulletproof hoster and so on. If you see such kind of things, that could be even interesting to share. But for example, you have some doubt of even what you share, it's fine. You can even ask for more support. And that's the thing that in the platforms, we have, for example, some workflow. So in the what we call taxonomies, we have specific workflow to define what is the state of information and what you are looking for. This one is even on the PISAX instance. And you see that we, for example, you have workflow that you can even do either within your organizations or within the members. So like Nicolas was mentioning, you can really start small and ask us for support, or for example, do I miss something and so on. And you can really use those kind of tags with, for example, workflow, where you say, for example, that you are requesting more information. There's another one, if I'm not misleading, called collaborative intelligence, where you can even, and we can even enable this one on PISAX, this one is not, which is, for example, people are requesting additional information. So even if you have a very, very partial events with not that much information there, you can say, for example, that you request more information. And maybe, for example, I don't know, the Internet Exchange Point in Greece might want to share information, and then the CIRCL in Germany say, oh yeah, but we have more information. And then you can add information there on the different systems. So that's a good point, and maybe I will enable that taxonomy there. So it's the kind of thing that you can really do in MISP to basically collaborate with others. I didn't show to you all the method of collaborations. I will show you one. So if you see that creating events and so on is a lot of work, and I have no time to work on that and so on, that's fine. You can already use information being used to it, but you can even do some other things. So for example, there's what we call sightings, is the ability to say to the community and to the user that creates the events that you have seen it too. And you see you have thumbs up here and thumbs up down here on this, for example, on this person, killnets on the object. And we can, for example, see that we can tell others that we have seen it. And that's a kind of collaboration too. So it applies for IP addresses, anything in MISP. And that means that it's like that you have an history of organization that have seen specific things. So it's a way of collaborating. So you don't always need to create events, create attributes and so on, but you can, for example, share details like I've seen this event too. It's giving, for example, a kind of view. If you have multiple internet exchange points that are seeing the same kind of things, maybe it's a problem to tackle globally. On the other hand, if it's only a very localized problem that is, I don't know, for a specific country or specific internet exchange point, if you have not a lot of sightings, it's maybe less interesting. So in MISP, you have plenty of ways to collaborate, like proposals and so on, but this is one way of doing collaboration too, without even creating any events, is to say to someone, I've seen it, or, for example, it's generating false positive, which is quite interesting too. If people are sharing back information to you and you use it, for example, feeding your firewalls, your CM and so on, but it's generating false positive, you can automatically say it in MISP, and like that, the producer of information can see, oh, maybe I did a mistake there. There are other options for the one for the false positive, but false positive management is super important to avoid being flooded by the platforms and getting too much information that are basically blocking you to do your investigation and so on. If there's any questions, don't hesitate. You can take the floor or even in the chat if you want.
Thank you, Alexander and Nicolas. That was very interesting. Do we have any questions from any of the attendees? No, everything's been answered. It's also one of those things is when when you come to the end of the presentations, you can't quite think of what you want to ask. So if you remember a question or comment after the session is over, then please feel free to contact Nicolas or Alexandra. We have a comment from Samuel Triolet from France IX, I think.
Nothing to add, just very, very impressive.
Oh, yeah, very impressive. Thanks, Samuel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, and if you have any idea, I mean, don't hesitate. to share with you, because this platform has been developed. It's an open source platform. Everything is free. You can basically access and get the source code and use it. It's really based on feedback from users. So if you have idea and so on, and I'm sure that it's a clever community that we have here, you might find other things that are interesting. There's a question from Alexi Sionen from Trex. Is it possible to see which other MISP is already interconnected with? Obviously. So that's the thing. On this instance, is not really the case. But for example, I'm going on a production or the test training instance there. We see that we have a synchronization with the different instances. And for example, if we go for a specific event, I'll just take a community one. There you can see that, for example, in this case, the sharing aspect would go to different instances and so on. And that's the thing, is when you have a MISP instance, by default is not connected to anyone. So if you want to search for specific communities to connect to, we have a specific part in MISP called list communities, where you can see the at least public one that are which are basically allowing us to make it public. But for example, there are already some Nordic countries that are using MISP at national level and so on. For example, I know there's a Certify in Finland. To go back to the question from Mr. Sionen, it's indeed the case. There are already some organization in Finland using it. I don't know all the ISAC in Finland, but I know that we have many users there, including the NCSC Finland, which is a National Cybersecurity Center there, that you can even contact and get access to their MISP instance. For the Nordic countries, I know many communities. There is one for the banks, there are one for the telecoms operators, and so on. So that's indeed a good point. So if you want, and if you search for point of contact, don't hesitate to contact us. We will share it with you.
Well, if there are no further questions or comments, I think we can close the session for today. Again, thank you very much, Alexandre. That was really, really interesting and quite impressive, just like Samuel said. And we really appreciate you taking the time to present this to us. So thank you once again. Thank you, Nicolas. And
thank you very much.
Again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact them after. And thank you for joining us today.